And welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Fantasy Football. I am Matt Okada. It is week 14, which means either you're in the playoffs, you're fighting to get in the playoffs, or you're somehow in a league that starts playoffs this week, which is shameful, but you didn't make it, in which case, how nice it is for you to be here still. Also here with me, hopefully in mini playoffs, is John Paulson. John, how are you doing, and how many playoffs are you in? Or about to be in?
Well, I'm in FFPC leagues, which are pretty difficult to make. You have to make the top four. And I was in the top four record-wise, but my points for weren't enough. I think I made one playoffs out of three in that format. And then my longtime keeper league, we're still wrapping up the regular season, but I was in the last I looked, I was in the 3 seed out of 6. I think I'm still in the 3 seed. So Scott Fishbowl's over for me, but I did make the playoffs in that one.
I missed the playoffs in that one for the first time in a few years. Unfortunate. But we all, or not all, but many of us still have 1 week to fight for that playoff spot. Some, however, I do know have already started. So if these bits of advice we're about to give over the next hour plus are for your first playoff matchup, good luck and change your rules next week or next year, because good gracious, is having 4 teams on bye in the first week of playoffs a disaster, which I've heard many people are dealing with. All right, let's get into Thursday night's game before we get to the rest of the show. It was a 44-30 Lions over Cowboys win. I mean, it was largely what we expected, I guess. Like, there was very little here that didn't go largely as you would plan with these players. Jahmyr Gibbs scored 3 touchdowns, so even though he wasn't great on the ground, and he also had 77 yards receiving, so he was incredible. David Montgomery scored, so he had his decent day that he has whenever he scores. Amon-Ra St. Brown ended up playing after being highly questionable. He and Jameson Williams were both good. Goff was fine. On the Cowboys side, CeeDee Lamb was having an unbelievable game before he exited with a concussion. So this is really the catching point of the game, because after leaving, George Pickens was not very good. He had 5 catches for 37 yards. Everyone else on the team, largely as expected, except Brian Flournoy, was oddly amazing. Any major takeaways that aren't just, these are good fantasy players playing good fantasy and scoring good fantasy points?
Yeah, funny story. Actually, I was at my son's basketball game. He's in a tournament right now up in Pico Rivera or someplace, and we had to drive up there. And the news broke that Amon-Ra St. Brown was actually going to play. The previous reports all indicated that he was going to be out, so I had to update the projections from my phone in the bleachers, and I landed at 12.9 half PPR fantasy points for him, and he ended up with 12.2. So,
Wow.
Kudos to me having to project on the run or on the fly like that. But I downgraded his expectations about 13% because he's playing through a ankle injury, and we found that if you don't sit out, you have an ankle injury, you don't sit out, you play that first week, receivers tend to perform about 87% of their normal production. So it worked out well. It's the injury index that we have at the site, which is a great resource for me and for anyone who wants to know how players perform through injuries. I saw that I watched about the first half of this when we got back home, and I saw Lamb exited the game with the concussion. Little surprising, that George Pickens out targeted by Ryan Flournoy, and Flournoy ends up with 9 for 115 and a touchdown. I would say you kind of summed it up on the Lions side. It's kind of went to plan, although they did score 44 points, which is, higher than expected. Goff had a good, solid game, 309 and a touchdown. I wrote up David Montgomery for sneaky starts. I thought he was a decent play this week. He ended up 73 total yards and a touchdown. So I'm sure that's going to help a few fantasy managers out there. Javonte got his touchdown. Dak had a couple picks, 376 yards. Just a kind of a wild, high-scoring game when you get 74 total points.
Yeah. Interestingly, Freddie Rod 2913 just threw a comment in the chat on YouTube. I think CD going out killed the Cowboys game script. Not sure, but they were targeting the tight end quite a bit. I saw very much the exact same thing. Was actually going to bring it up. It just seemed like they were a little off. They did end up staging a pretty decent comeback late in the game, mostly thanks to Brandon Aubrey kicking 74 70-yard field goals, basically. Not quite, that's an exaggeration, but you get the point. Jake Ferguson, this is more of a look ahead to next week, but if CeeDee Lamb is out, I imagine he gets a bump because he has been better with Lamb out. So if Lamb is still in the concussion protocol next week, we'll probably touch on that and see where Ferguson falls in your rankings. But otherwise, largely quote unquote to script here. We can move on from this game, although it was a great game, great fantasy game. To the news and injuries. As a reminder, if you are in the YouTube or the Twitter chats, or do we stream this on Blue Sky? I actually don't even know, John.
I posted.
Okay. So you can either any of those places you can drop comments. Feel free to drop in questions. If you have basic start sit 1v1 players in your lineup questions, just go to 444.com and check out John's rankings because you can answer those very easily with those. But anything on trades, planning for the playoff stretch, well, I guess trades is mostly over, but planning for the playoff stretch, rest of seasons, hit us in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the show. To the news, Justin Herbert. He got surgery for the broken left hand that he suffered last week. Got the surgery on Monday and is TBD for week 14. But the team is optimistic that he will play. However, it's not been an optimistic situation for the offense in recent weeks. So my question to you is, if he plays, who do you trust, including himself and any of his receivers? And if he doesn't play, how much does that hurt his receivers?
It's his left hand. It's his non-throwing hand. So this is a smaller downgrade than something going on with his throwing hand, something going on with his ankle or hamstring or back. It's the offhand. So the question is, can he take a snap from center? If not, they might have to go to more shotgun. He wasn't ranked terribly high regardless because it's not a terribly good matchup against Philly. They're 8th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. So right now I've got him at about QB 14 or QB 17 rather. I do wonder if he's going to run as much as he normally does, putting himself in harm's way, possibly a helmet on that hand, or he's trying to, slide and trying to stabilize himself with his offhand and, does something to his, something further to his hand. I don't know. So I'm a little worried about his rushing upside, but in general, this is just not a very good matchup. I think some people will be in a position where they need to start him, and I think at QB 17, that's legit. McConkey, I think, is fine, and then Keenan and Quentin Johnston have kind of fallen off a bit, so they're more wide receiver 4 types for me, or flex types in this one. Also not a good matchup for receivers. And Gadsden has kind of slowed down a little bit as well, but he's still startable as a low end tight end 1.
Okay. Also in LA, O'Marion Hampton is likely to return from IR this Monday night. We don't have an official designation yet. He's been practicing in a limited fashion, but there was a chance he would play last week. It sounded like. Ended up not. Sounds like he could come back this week. The problem here is that it's on Monday night, which means if we don't find out before Sunday, we're going to be in a tough pickle. Are you, let's assume that we do find out. Are you happy to start him right away as an RB2 or better?
It's been a really long layoff. And when guys come back from that long of a layoff, they don't usually just reassume their bell cow or, heavy RB1 lead role. That goes for receivers and tight ends and everything. Usually the snaps are scaled back a little bit. And Kimani Vidal has played pretty well. I mean, it's not a consistent production from him, but I think they'll keep him involved, especially in his first in Hampton's first game back, they're not going to want to overdo it with him. So I rank him more as a wide running back 3. It isn't a bad matchup. Philly is 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position, but in this scenario, I'm not confident he's going to see the 15 to 17 touches that we really want from our RB1, RB2 types. I think there are going to be managers that are in a pinch and are going to need to start him. Thankfully, it's not a bad matchup, and you can hope that he gets that 12, 13 carries and can do something with it.
Obviously, because of the Monday thing, keep an eye on the news regardless. Also, just as a throwaway, this is actually super important to pay attention to because it's not necessarily real, but Vidal has been consistently inconsistent. He's been good, bad, good, bad, good, bad every single week. He's due for bad this week, but that's not necessarily real. Just noting that. Okay, down to the Buccaneers. Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan, who has not played at all this year, you might remember he had that preseason injury. I believe it was a collarbone. Are both practicing in limited fashions after they had their IR windows opened. Chris Godwin is healthier than he has been. He's actually not on the practice report. And then Baker Mayfield's been banged up. This whole team is tough to suss out right now. I don't even know how to pitch the question to you because there's so many moving parts. But just what's your expectations for this group this week and maybe to some degree rest of season once they're all back?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Mike Evans news is much more important than the Jalen McMillan news, unless Mike Evans can't play and Jalen McMillan can, because then he becomes probably the third receiver, although, Sterling Shepard's been filling that role and Tez Johnson as well. So if they're both back, again, long layoff for Evans, not expecting a full workload. He could be a wide receiver 3 with some touchdown equity. We've got Godwin in the fold. We've got Emeka Egbuka in the fold. I would expect those 3 players to be the top 3 if all 3 are healthy. So McMillan is kind of an afterthought for me right now, unless we get some situation where Evans is out and he's in.
While we are on the subject, and because he doesn't actually show up in any of the matchup breakdown stuff later in the show, what are you making of Emeka Egbuka? Let's assume things go relatively normal. Evans comes back this week or next. He has been very bad most of the last several weeks, except for one good game in week 10, but he's still getting a ton of targets. So should fantasy managers be rolling him out confidently because of the usage, or should they be concerned because of the single-digit fantasy outputs?
Well, I think if you're bringing Mike Evans back, there's going to be trouble in terms of targets potentially. I mean, he's gotten 8, 9, 13. That's working backwards. So he's been steadily involved. It's just the touchdowns have really slowed down. I mean, he has 6 on the year, and 5 of them came in the first 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So, he had the big game against New England, 6 for 115 and a touchdown and 13 targets. And then since then, he hasn't had more than 42 yards receiving. So I think you're getting, if Evans is back, you're kind of getting him into where we maybe thought he would be preseason, which is kind of the wide receiver 3-ish, 2-3-ish there, just depending on how much Godwin is playing and Evans is able to play. I mean, any given week, I think he could erupt. But he's had kind of a slow stretch, as you mentioned. But this matchup's not great against New Orleans. They're 7th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position, but then he has Atlanta next week, Carolina the next week after that, and Miami. So, nothing too daunting on the playoff front.
All righty. Another receiving crew that's a little tough to figure out right now. The Chicago Bears. Roma Dunze did not practice yesterday being Thursday. Do not yet have a Friday practice report, but it's not looking great with a DNP on Thursday. This is a foot injury. He's also been very inconsistent. If he is out, does it elevate somebody else, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, to near must-start territory or somewhere close to that? And if he's in, are you confident playing him given the inconsistency and the injury?
Well, no, I'm not confident playing Rome Odunze at this point. I mean, he had started the season incredibly well. Looked like he was going to, overtake DJ Moore, and did really as the wide receiver one there, but it's been kind of hit or miss since the bye. And now he's injured. I think if he's out, it kind of clears things up where DJ Moore and Luther Burden are probably playable. But you're not wanting to run out and start a lot of Bears against the Packers this week. I think this is a good defense, even if it's not a great fantasy defense. They're pretty stingy. There could be some potential for the running game to get going. The Bears running game since the bye has been excellent. Teams have struggled to run on the Packers for the most part. So we shall see. They lost their tackle, their really good tackle, defensive tackle, last week. So they have to sort of cover up for that. We'll see what happens and how this game pans out. I don't expect it to be a high scoring game. So if Odunze's out, if Odunze's in, I have him as like a low end wide receiver 3. If he's out, then I think DJ Moore and Luther Burden get into that wide receiver 3-4 territory where you could start them, but you're not really wanting to.
Yeah, a bit confusing there. This is fresh, hot off the presses. As of 3 minutes ago, according to RotoWire, Trey Benson is not only out again this week with the knee injury he's been working through, but Jonathan Gannon, the head coach, has acknowledged a possibility that he might miss the rest of the season. So we'll talk now for now, but then maybe you have some thoughts down the stretch. Bam Knight, it will be the guy, it sounds like, for the short term or maybe long term. They have a terrible matchup with the Rams this week. So how confident do you feel throwing him out there in this matchup?
Not super confident. RB26, Rams 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. You alluded to it's a tough matchup. So he's down there with Kareem Hunt and that, against the Texans in a tough matchup. But, fantasy managers at this point, if they need a win, you're looking for touches. He does have touchdown equity. He does have a tendency to score touchdowns for them if they are rushing touchdowns in that game for the Cardinals, although the team has been really pass happy. Jacoby Brissett is averaging 43 pass attempts in his starts. And this is also a game that they project to fall behind rather quickly. And, they have been able to stay in games and stay competitive and, move the ball into the red zone and get opportunities. So Knight could end up with 60, 70 yards and a touchdown fairly easily. It's not, he could also end up with 30 total yards and no scores. So the floor is pretty low there.
Speaking of moving the ball and getting in the red zone and scoring touchdowns, Marvin Harrison Jr. is also out again. He had missed a couple games a couple weeks ago, and when he was gone, Michael Wilson from out of nowhere was the best, suddenly the most targeted and one of the best receivers in all of fantasy. 33 targets, 25 catches, over 300 yards. I can't even do the math on 185 plus 118 that fast. In those 2 weeks that Harrison was out, how high does he end up in your rankings with Harrison out?
Yeah, I think that's 303 total yards doing that math while you were talking. Michael Wilson ranked 16th this week, assuming I had assumed all along that Harrison was not going to be able to play after not being able to re-enter the game with that heel injury. So, yeah, I mean, I think Wilson is a really strong start. They're going to have trouble running the ball, as we just talked about. They're probably going to fall behind. This is definitely a high volume game for Brissett and the receivers. Greg Dortch, I don't know his status off the top of my head right now, but his chest, he had a chest injury on top of, or was not practicing as of yesterday with a chest injury. So I don't know if he's going to be back. It might just be Michael Wilson and Trey McBride really as the top 2 receivers with not a lot of help. So I would expect a lot of targets for both those players.
Yeah, same or no update yet on Dortch, though I expect it could be coming any minute as we record this early on Friday. So keep an eye on that, because if Dortch does play, does he become startable as well?
Yeah, actually, it's saying right now, I'm looking at So practice report, it says out. They're listing him as out, I
Oof.
believe. So
Oof.
yeah, I mean, if he
Okay.
were to play, which I don't think he's going to, he'd be startable in
Mhm.
PPR formats. But I'm going to need to remove him from the rankings and bump somebody else up. Looks like Xavier Weaver.
Alrighty. Yeah. Xavier Weaver and then 20 targets each for Wilson and McBride, it would seem. Good heavens. Alrighty. Elsewhere in the NFC West, out of the injury situations for now, Rams offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur, that is not Matt LaFleur, but Mike LaFleur, said that the team wants to keep Kyron Williams fresh for the playoffs. And we have seen that. And so it's not coming out of nowhere, this quote, as Blake Corum has gotten more involved. This is not something fantasy managers particularly want to hear, I don't think. How much does this affect your projections for Kyron and potentially also for Corum in the sense that he maybe becomes flexible?
Yeah, so this sort of language. You also have Kyron Williams dealing with an injury, probably going to play. But, once a coordinator or coach says we want to keep so and so fresh for the playoffs, it's certainly worrisome that he's going to start losing some of his workload. So Kyron, I think in a week like this against the Cardinals, very likely to score a touchdown under normal circumstances. I would say if you have Quorum, you're feeling a lot better about having to run him out there as a guy who could get 12, 15 carries in this game. I still think Kyron is certainly startable given the high scoring offense and the matchup against the Cardinals, but he's ranked 16th this week, whereas he'd normally be a top 10, 11 back. So there's a little bit of a downgrade. You're sort of expecting an extra series for Quorum, and that could, grow even further. But, Kyron's still the lead back. I still think they'll have him in the lead role unless he gets dinged up. I think at worst case, you're looking at like a 50-50 split between these two. And that's viable. That makes Quorum viable as an RB3 flex type.
Corum has been somewhat decent with the work he's gotten. So if he does get those, especially last week at 81 yards and a touchdown on 7 carries, if he does start to get more work, becomes an interesting play. Somewhat, not I won't say a reverse of this, but a different wrinkle on this. Over in Carolina, Dave Canales said that Rico Dowdle will, quote, remain the team's primary early down back. But that's a little confusing because both he and Chuba Hubbard saw pretty much exactly equal work last week. Dowdle had one more carry. Hubbard was much more involved as a receiver. And you could argue that many of his carries came in more receiving down situations. So maybe that's largely what Canales is getting at. But we care about what ends up being the box score of carries and touches, and it was almost exactly equal. They were very evenly matched. So do you expect Dowdle to be primary, as the word that Canales is using, enough to be an RB2 or even 1 like he was earlier? Or do you expect this to be like a hot hand committee thing? How much do you believe Canales here?
Well, I mean, I think we're seeing that perhaps it is a hot hand committee right now with Dowdle in the lead role. I mean, both things can be true. He could be the lead back and get the start and have first crack at it, and it's also a hot hand situation. I mean, it's
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, you look at Chuba, he had 17 carries for 83 yards. Rico had 18 carries for 58 yards. So and the snaps were 59%, 42% in favor of Hubbard. And then he also, they both had 2 catches, 41 yards and a touchdown for Hubbard, 21 yards for Dowdle. So Dowdle still had a pretty decent game, 9.9 PPR points, but not getting the touchdown certainly hurt him. I think this is 40 touches for this backfield last week. I don't know that they're going to be able to, continue to do that, after the bye. So I would look at Dowdle probably in that 18 to 25 range. If everybody's off of buys, and I think this is the last week of buys, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have more people ranked. So I'm looking at him as a low end RB2. And then there's going to be some good games there if he continues with this sort of workload, especially if he has a good matchup.
These, as you mentioned, the Panthers are one of the teams on bye. Coming out the other end, they have the Saints, Buccaneers, and Seahawks to end the season. So we will see where they're at, but it sounds like Dada will be fringe starter for you most likely. Alvin Kamara still not practicing as of what last I saw, which was Thursday's designations. A lot of people got very excited about Devin Neal last week because he took over the vast majority of snaps when Kamara got hurt the week prior to that. Then Neal came out and did have the vast majority of touches again last week, but he wasn't very good with them. Not all that surprising, if you ask me, on this offense. Do you have any trust in him at all if Kamara doesn't play? Like, where does he fall for you? Is he start worthy or is he more of a fringe flex at best?
Well, I wrote him up for sneaky starts. It
it.
was a tough week. It was a tough week for sneaky starts at the running back position. Zonovan, Bam Knight, Chris Rodriguez, David Montgomery. Looking at the Minnesota backfield too, wondering about Aaron Jones, although it looks like he may play as of yesterday. Devin Neal, I mean, there are going to be managers in this position. I may start him. I started him last week. It got about 10 points, I guess, out of him. But he had 17 of the team's 22 backfield touches. I'm not confident that he gets any goal line work. That has been going to Taysom Hill. But 17 touches is 17 touches, even for the Saints. So, and it's not a bad matchup really against the Bucs. They're 22nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position, giving up 134 total yards, 1 touchdown per game to opposing backfields this season. Especially in the passing game, they've allowed 4.8 catches for 57 yards and a third of a touchdown per game to the running back position. Neal ran 33 routes on 48 Tyler Shuff dropbacks last week. So he's the most likely, back on this team that's going to get any sort of receiving production. So I think there is some upside here in PPR formats. Maybe he ends up in the end zone with a touchdown catch. I think there's, low end RB2, high end RB3 flex appeal here with Neal. I think there's some upside here, especially in the receiving game.
Not super heavily rostered, only 55% rostered on Yahoo leagues, which is what we use for the 4for4 waiver article. And they do get the Panthers, Jets, and Titans in the fantasy playoffs. So you probably want to add him just in case Kamara gets shut down for the year or doesn't come back. We'll see what the upside is. Hopefully he can find a little bit more of it, but that's a nice stretch to end the year. Jaden Reed. Well, a couple more bits of news before we get to the matchups. Jaden Reed is practicing. We have a few wide receivers this week that are practicing after being out for a long time. This is the question of the week almost every week, it feels like, is what's going on with the Packers receiving core? What do you expect from the Packers receiving core? Now we have another question mark to throw into the crew. If he plays, what question mark? What are we doing here? Anything? Can we trust anyone?
Well, as a Packer fan, this is like a good problem to have. And
true.
They are really, they don't have like the stud, like a Jamar Chase or Devontae Adams for that matter, but they have a deep, talented receiving core. And if they, Dontavian Wicks had the breakout game against the Lions on Thanksgiving. Christian Watson has been playing great since coming back. He's not a high volume guy, but they've been connecting Jordan Love and Toyotathon Jordan Love and Christian Watson have been connecting, and it's a good matchup against the Bears. So I feel like Watson is a top 20 receiver. I think there's obviously a low floor there if he only has like one catch and they miss out on the couple deep bombs they'll take with him, but he's been catching the ball all over the field, short routes, intermediate routes, and long deep routes as well. Dobbs is more of a possession guy, potential to score a touchdown. They have been running some really interesting plays, especially against the Lions. They saw some tendencies, man-to-man tendencies in the secondary there, and Matt LaFleur had a couple of really nice play designs for Dobbs and then another one for Wicks, where they were using traffic and screens to get open picks, basically. So I don't know that Wicks goes away if Reed is back. I don't think he does. Wicks was playing even before that, and plus he just basically had a breakout game and had the game-winning catch on top of 2 touchdowns showing good hands, that was always his bugaboo. He was always able to get open, but was struggling with drops, similar to Devontae Adams as a rookie early in his career. So I think you see a 4 receiver rotation. Reed probably doesn't play his usual snaps in his first game back. They're going to probably just have him in for a third or a quarter if he does play, third or quarter of the snaps. So I think if Reed is back, Watson is still startable. His role is, I think, sort of established right now. Dobbs is less startable than he would be in the rankings right now, which is as a wide receiver 3-4. Wicks is less startable than the wide receiver 4 he is right now, but not a whole lot lower, because you would think he has that momentum and can carry that forward in a game against the Bears. Again, I don't think this is going to be a shootout necessarily. Both defenses have been playing pretty well. There's so much at stake. I don't know how wild they're going to get with their offenses, but we'll see. But this is basically and then we also even talked about Matthew Golden.
Yeah,
he's back.
We didn't even mention Matthew Golden.
He'll be in for a few routes. It's going to be tough for them to find enough snaps for these 5 receivers if everybody's healthy. And the only one I really have confidence in, because of the level of play he's at, is Christian Watson.
Okay. Also takes Watson less volume to be good because of the way he's being used. Wowie, that is a complicated group. Largely speaking, that's the order you'll have them in any given week. I would assume it doesn't change.
Well, I think if Reed had stayed healthy, he was my favorite receiver of this group fantasy wise. He had back-to-back top 22 or top 21 seasons, and even though he's not a big volume guy, he's highly effective and I think the most talented. But now with Watson's return, we're even starting to see like that stretch. I don't know if it was a rookie season or second season where he broke. He's not breaking fantasy, but he looks good out there, and he's doing more than the one-trick pony deep shots that he's been known for. So he's playing great. I feel really good about this group if they're all healthy going into the playoffs. But from a fantasy standpoint, I would think Watson first right now, and then this week is going to be more of the same, I think, with Dobbs and Wicks playing a lot. But if you get into Reed being healthy again, then I think he might move into that number 2 spot.
Yeah, I believe it was his rookie year, Christian Watson, where he scored like 6 or 7 touchdowns in a span of 4 or 5 games. That was crazy, and he's been playing very well. Very briefly, Mark Andrews signed a 3-year, $39 million contract shortly after. It was not him, but Isaiah Likely, who plastered the Bengals, which someone is bound to do every week, and it was quite frustrating that it was Likely and not Mark Andrews. This was on Thanksgiving night. Does this matter to you at all? Obviously for Dynasty it matters, but for redraft for this week, does it tell you something that you're prone to believe they get the Bengals again? Will it change who you like more in that game, or is this just good for you, Mark Andrews? We're going to keep doing what we do.
This is like, I don't know, zero impact on my rankings or rest of season, projections or rankings. But I did send out a post on Blue Sky to say if you know any dynasty managers who've been holding Isaiah Likely, to give them a hug, because they need it after this news.
Yep.
It's rough. Because you were sort of expecting at some point Andrews to move on and Likely to take over as the pure tight end 1 there.
Yeah, very much seemed it would be this year. I am one of those dynasty managers, so I'll be hugging myself for the rest of this podcast. And then last, a quick thing, just an injury to monitor. Kenneth Walker III has a glute issue. He has been playing through it previously. He's been limited this week, so he should play, but just keep an eye on that. Obviously, if he's out, Zach Charbonnet becomes much more interesting. If he's in, those two are splitting work, but I assume you still like Walker as a start.
I have some breaking news as well. Walker still is a mid-range RB2. Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan both out.
Okay.
Not play this week.
Wow.
We also have Jaden Daniels will start.
Wow.
T. Higgins has cleared concussion protocol. And Kyler Murray not going to play again this season.
Not surprising.
Not surprising.
Yeah. The rest of that, quite solid breaking news to come in with. But yeah, I didn't expect to see Kyler in a Cardinals uniform again. So we very well might not. All right. Let's get to the matchups. Game of the week. It's an easy one. It is Bengals Bills. 53.5 point over under. Joe Burrow back. So this should be a super fun one. The Cincinnati D is quietly 12th in AFPA against wide receivers. That's 12th toughest. So better than average. But they are bottom 2 against every other position. The tough thing here is that the Bills wide receivers are the ones we have the most questions about. So which pass catchers do you trust, if any, for Buffalo? And then given the matchup for the running backs, do you have any interest in streaming Ray Davis or Ty Johnson, who've both seen some work recently against a good matchup?
Well, I was actually looking at Khalil Shakir's ranking yesterday and wondering if I should be higher on him. And then I went to the wide receiver cornerback matchup chart, and in the slot he has up against Jalen Davis, who is allowing the fewest fantasy points per route covered on this worksheet that I'm looking at. So Shakir is, I would say, not a matchup based start. You could still start him based on his volume or just expected fantasy points, real points to be scored in this game. But it's not a favorable matchup for him in the slot, and there's nobody else there that is consistent enough at receiver. We'll see I don't know what Dalton Kincaid's status is. He's been limited, and it has continued to be limited for a while, and hasn't played yet. This is certainly a spot where you could deploy Dawson Knox, but I don't have him ranked high because he has done basically nothing. He's looks like Kincaid is questionable at the moment with that hamstring, couple limited practices. So if he's back, then he's intriguing in this matchup because the Bengals are pretty bad against the tight end position.
Officially questionable for Kincaid, so tough to know there. On the other side, the Bills defense is perhaps the strongest run funnel in the entire league. They are 29th in AFPA against running backs, but top 6 against all the passing attack positions. So how high are you on Chase Brown is question number 1, but everybody who's got him is starting him. I'm also curious, are you interested in playing Samaje Perine, who has been curiously involved his last 2 healthy games and somewhat productive? And then in the passing game, do you consider Joe Burrow just locked and loaded as a play like we would have expected him to be before injury? And do you like any of the extra wide receivers there besides Higgins, who we now know is playing?
It's a nice matchup for Perine, and I think when you get into these weeks and people are looking for something, you can look at RB2s that are involved in nice matchups like this against Buffalo. I don't have him ranked terribly high, but as an RB4 flex, dart throw, you could do a lot worse than a guy who's probably going to get 10 touches in a nice matchup. Chase Brown, I'm ranked as a low end RB1. I gave out the more on his rushing and receiving number. I think his rushing number is pretty low, but the rushing and receiving is more intriguing because I think he could beat the rushing number or the rushing and receiving number just with his rushing. But if the Bills were to jump out to a lead here and the Bengals are unable to stick with the run, then you could see Brown getting a lot of work in the passing game and be able to still have a way to go over on that number. But I have him at RB10. Burrow at QB6. I mean, it's not a good matchup. It's their second adjusted fantasy points a lot of the position, but Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow, and he's a QB1 pretty much every week unless there's something really weird going on with him. Higgins back. You can start him. The only concern there is receivers that come back from a concussion after a week off. I believe, if I remember correctly, and I'm looking it up right now, head injuries minus 30%. Just double checking this. Concussion, 1 week missed, minus 31.7% production.
Wow.
from that. So I don't necessarily downgrade that entire amount, but I've got him a little lower than what his usual production is. And it's not not a great matchup for receivers either. Jamar Chase is locked and loaded, and Higgins is really the only other option there.
Okay. The fade of the week is even easier because this might be the worst game of the entire season. We will try to talk as little about it as possible, but it is Titans Browns, the long awaited Cam Ward Shadur Sanders showdown, 33.5 point over under, which I did not research in depth, but feeling about 90% confident is the lowest of the entire year. The Tennessee defense is largely pretty generally soft in terms of AFPA. You're obviously starting Quinshon Judkins, who's been basically the entire offense recently. But outside of that, are you starting anyone else in this game on either side of the ball?
Yeah, the only player that springs to mind is Harold Fannin. I think as a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 streamer type, he has some appeal just because he does get quite a few targets for a player at the tight end position. But other than that, no.
Woof. Okay, well, we were able to be quick on it. That's wonderful. Moving on. We'll get to the positional matchups and then any questions in the chat that pertain to rest of season questions. Quarterbacks, the good. Wow. The fact that this name is in here tells you more than the matchup or anything else. Lamar Jackson against the Steelers, who are 21st in AFPA. If you've been paying attention to this show all year, this section of the podcast is usually about fringe starters. So what the heck was Lamar Jackson doing in here? Well, he has been terrible. Absolutely terrible. So before I even get to the other names, this one is so big that I want to ask you about this one on its own. Do you trust Lamar Jackson? And in this matchup, in any matchup, given how he's been playing lately and seemingly hampered potentially even by injury still?
Yeah, I mean, he was limited Wednesday, did not practice Thursday. I believe he's out there today and is expected to play. But, it's getting a little dicey, I would say. I mean, he's been I would say it's been pretty dicey. But since he came back from injury, he had a 26-point game against Miami, 17 against Minnesota. So that's all fine. And then he had 5 points against Cleveland, tough defense, 7 points against the Jets, mediocre defense, and then 6.5 points against the Bengals, bad defense. So we're certainly into worrisome type territory. The Steelers also qualify as a generous team to the pass, especially. So there is opportunity here. I don't know that there are a lot of, it's still Lamar Jackson, so he can erupt at any time. It doesn't seem like we're trending to that right now, though. So I am a little bit worried about him, keeping an eye on his practice activity and market numbers, because they could just try to go real conservative and try to get a win with their running game and some short passes and stuff. And it's just not his typical fantasy output. But, you get into this Baker Mayfield, Jordan Love, Bo Nix, Jacoby Brissett group, and you could potentially sit him for one of those, just hoping that you can run a healthier player out there. But it is very difficult to bench Lamar Jackson since he has been QB1 overall multiple seasons, I think.
Yes. He was QB1 overall last year, I know for sure. Notably, has not been running since he came back from that injury. I believe topped around 30-something yards in one game, but then like lower than 20 in all the rest. So that matters not just to his fantasy points, but you would imagine to the threat that he poses to defenses, which then maybe allows them to key in on his passing a little more. The rest of the names, or many of the other names in our matchups, are ones you just laid out. Jordan Love against the Bears, who are 22nd in AFPA. And Daniel Jones against the Jaguars, who are 29th in AFPA. He is dealing with this fibula injury and also has been struggling a bit of late. But are those both guys that you're rolling out into fantasy lineups given the matchups? And I'll say, for anyone else we talk about here, them or Lamar Jackson, I'd be curious to know.
Well, I've got Jackson right now at 8, and I've got Love at 10. And I have in my long running keeper league, I have a difficult decision: Love versus Jacoby Brissett. And Brissett has been so consistent fantasy wise that I may just go with him. Because Love, you might get the monster week winner, but you also might get a game where he doesn't throw a touchdown. And that's happened in the last couple of weeks. It is also Toyotathon, so there's that going into it. This is a really important game though for the Packers. I do think he plays well and has a couple touchdown passes. But Daniel Jones is someone that would be ranked higher if I were confident that he would run. But he had a very low rushing total, if anything, last week. So we're just relying now, I think, on him as a passer, playing through this fibula injury. It is a very nice matchup against Jacksonville, which is a pass funnel. However, they have Jonathan Taylor, and I don't know if that the Colts can be forced to pass funnel, or the Jaguars can get them to just throw the ball, because they do have Jonathan Taylor in a very strong running game. So Jones is okay for me. QB 14. So I've got him ahead of like the Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Justin Herbert of the world right now. I have him one spot below Trevor Lawrence, because Trevor Lawrence is healthier and is running and will score rushing touchdowns, and will probably have to throw the ball against the Colts to try to stay in the game. But that's sort of the group I've got Jones in right now.
I believe I may touched on this podcast before, but Jordan Love has established one of the most reliable splits I've ever seen in fantasy between good matchups, quote unquote green matchups, and all the other ones. In his 7 green games, he's averaged 21.5 fantasy points per game with a low of basically 16 and a high of 28. In the other 5 games, he's averaged 10.1 fantasy points per game with a low of 7 and a high of 13.4. This is a green one, so this has been unfailingly accurate all year. We'll see what happens.
Well, hold on. So they're 22nd in adjusted fantasy points, a lot of the quarterback position, and they're not quite colored green on our hot spots. They're 22nd.
Are they gray?
They're just white. It's neutral.
Okay.
It's considered neutral. Yeah. So I just wanted to lay that caveat out there in case anyone were just following along with the green, quote unquote, green matches. Chicago has been green for most of the year, but they've trended up a little bit. It is an interesting trend. I mean, Minnesota, he had a bad game. They're 17th. Pittsburgh, neutral. They're 21st now. He had 360 and 3. You might have been counting that as a green matchup for him.
Yeah.
So you could say, anybody ranked outside the top 20, it's been very, very positive. Detroit 234 and 4. The Giants 174 with 2 touchdowns. So that's 17.7. That's a pretty good game. Pittsburgh, I mentioned 360 and 3. So that's 28 points. Cincinnati 259 and a touchdown. 15. That was okay. Dallas 337 and 3. 26 points. And Washington 292 and 2. 21 points. And then Detroit in week 1, green matchup, 188 and 2 for 16 points. So he's gotten you at least high-end QB2 or reasonable QB2 numbers or better in all those matchups with teams that are outside the top 20 in QB AFPA.
I like it. Worth noting, by the way, on this front and in general this time of year, I'm curious to get your thoughts. It is going to be, according to the NFL weather site I pay attention to, 11 degrees at Lambeau. Any general concerns about weather this time of year? Cold weather, obviously wind starts to become maybe a little bit more of an issue, and then snow, which is not expected for Green Bay, but it is expected for Buffalo, which is not something we touched on in that game. But just generally speaking, what starts to affect things for you weather-wise this time of year?
So I will keep track of the weather, and if I start, and I'll keep track of the totals. The surest sign that there's going to be weather is the totals are dropping. In Vegas. I mean, that's what happens. So, and I also am in touch with, this time of year especially, I'm in touch with Chris, our old colleague, Chris Allen. He always responds to my texts about what's going on with the weather. And I think with cold weather, unless we're getting to be bitter cold, and I'm pulling up the Green Bay weather just to touch on that.
I think
For
11
Sunday,
degrees
it
last.
says a high of 19, and winds aren't bad, but it is, at noon you get 12-mile-per-hour wind, high of or 18 degrees at that point. So it's not going to be pleasurable out there. So that cold weather tends to reduce passing attempts a bit. Scoring goes down a bit. I already think this has the potential to be a lower scoring game. So it is something to be, I would say, cognizant of. And then if you get into Sunday morning and we have a blizzard hitting, I'll be adjusting projections downward and rerunning projections for the new total, the new line, and that will drag down all those numbers. I'm also keeping track of this year the market-based projections for these players that we have through Sharp Stack, and I'm for a game that is getting hit with a blizzard, I'll be looking at those players' specific totals and reception totals and everything to see where the market is moving on those, so that we have the most accurate and up-to-date projections possible.
Worth noting, the total has dropped 2 points since it opened in this Bears-Packers game, and the Packers are favored by 6.5. We're not a betting show, but that is curious, going up against the number 1 seed in the NFC. Interesting.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I think Vegas and the bettors feel like the Bears haven't proven themselves to be as good as their record. I think that is what they're saying. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to post any bulletin board material for the Bears fans out there. I'm worried about this game from a Packers standpoint, but it is at home, so that's 3 points usually. And then I think they're saying right now that the bettors believe that the Packers are an additional 3 points better.
Yeah. All righty. Two together matchups. On the bad side of quarterbacks, we're still in the middle of this quarterback situation because so much intriguing stuff to talk about. Patrick Mahomes gets the Texans. They are third in AFPA and murderous. They've been terrible against quarterbacks all year. Baker Mayfield gets the Saints, who are fourth. You mentioned his name above when we were talking about Lamar. Bo Nix, you also mentioned him, sixth in AFPA, or the Raiders are sixth in AFPA. And then we just touched on Caleb Williams against the Packers. They are fifth, and it's cold, and they're not favored by a lot. So where do these guys fall for you? Some guys that a lot of people have been starting somewhat regularly.
Yeah, I think, given the quarterback, we talked about some of these, Darnold is kind of cooled off at QB 16. Herbert's dinged up. Marcus Mariota is not actually going to start, so I have to update projections there. Jaden Daniels will be very startable against in the Dome against Minnesota, who are sort of middle of the road against the position. But I think you're in a position where you have to start these guys. Baker Mayfield, probably. I don't think you'd necessarily have another better quarterback on the roster. Bo Nix, his legs and the Denver offense has been pretty good. He's not rock solid like Drake May has been, but he's kind of a similar. Was his rushing ability is a bit similar. I think Caleb Williams is more of a low end QB2 this week. I think I'm a little bit worried about his accuracy. We'll see how things go in the cold against a very ferocious defense that is going to be salivating at any dropbacks that they have. Like, I think the way that the Bears win this game is they go pretty run heavy and are effective with it, and the Packers can't stop it. And I think if they get Caleb Williams in a position where they got to throw, Roma Dunze's dinged up, may or may not play, they're going to be in good shape, the Packer defense. So I'm not confident in Williams, but I think Mahomes, certainly his level of play is high enough that you can start him against Houston. You're just not expecting a ceiling game for him. And Mayfield and Nix, I think, are very viable as low-end QB1s.
All righty. To the running backs. Not many on the good side. RJ Harvey gets the Raiders, who are 27th in AFPA, and he's been very good lately. I'm curious how close to must start he is getting for you. And then the Seattle running backs, TBD with Kenneth Walker. Keep an eye on that. But they get the Falcons, who are 28th in AFPA, and they're a tough call every week because of how Seattle refuses to use either of them in full. And Instead, usually gives a bunch of touchdowns to Charbonnet and a bunch of between the 20s work to Walker, although that's been shifting a bit. How much do you like Harvey, and then how do you feel about the Seahawks duo?
Harvey's ranked RB 14 this week, so just below Javonte Williams and Saquon Barkley. I've got more confidence in him than, say, an Ashton Genty against Denver. More confidence than Kyron, given that Corum situation we discussed earlier. So I think he's high-end RB2 this week, especially in a nice matchup against Vegas in a game that they should control. They should be in positive game script, I would think. And then I think, both Seattle running backs are viable, but Walker has been playing better lately. I've got him at RB17, Charbonnet at RB31. So I think he's more of an RB3 flex type, and you're hoping he gets a touchdown. But Atlanta's, as you mentioned, 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position.
Yeah, it is nice. On the bad side, Woody Marks, who has quite clearly taken over the backfield, not necessarily been the most efficient guy, but he gets the Chiefs, who are second in AFPA. Very tough matchup. It'll be Bam night for the Cardinals, gets the Rams. We touched on this a bit. They're fifth in AFPA, very difficult. And then on the flip side of that Texans-Chiefs game, the Kareem Hunt / Isaiah Pacheco, or whatever we're calling that group, gets the Texans, who are third. And I'm not sure what to make of that backfield in general. So are you willing to start any of those guys?
I think in a pinch, there are going to be managers in a situation where they have to start Marks, Knight, and I think Hunt is really the only viable starter right now in KC. He had 15 touches of the 20. Isaiah Pacheco had 3 carries for 16 yards and 2 catches for 17 yards. Neither player found the end zone, but Hunt is, as of right now, still the lead back there, and I think he's viable. It's just because the Chiefs score touchdowns and get in the red zone and get into the goal line area, and he could have a touchdown or two, but probably unlikely against Houston. Mark's dealing with a ankle injury. He did not practice on Wednesday, came back and practiced yesterday. It does look like he's on track to play, but it's a bad matchup against Kansas City. So he's more of an RB3 type for me. And I think Knight is, as we discussed, the only viable one. And I mean, I guess Michael Carter in a PPR format does catch some passes, but I would say Knight is the viable one there for Arizona. All these guys ranked as RB3s for me this week.
Oof, ugly group. But to your point, someone will probably need to play them. Wide receivers. We've got a couple crews of wide receivers that are confusing. One of them is Green Bay against the Bears, who were 31st. We've already covered that in pretty deep detail, so we don't need to hit on that again. But just a reminder that the Bears' defense in AFPA against wideouts has been quite soft. In Jacksonville, in what it feels like a somewhat similar situation, just confusing to know who's who, the wide receivers there are getting a Colts defense that are 28th in AFPA, which is quite nice, but it's tough to figure out what's going on there. And then Zay Flowers gets the Steelers, who are 30th in AFPA. He's been very inconsistent. Obviously had that hot start to the year and then has kind of cooled quite a bit. And DK Metcalf is somewhat similar, actually. Gets the Ravens on the flip side of that same game, who are 26th in AFPA. Curious if you're willing to roll either of them out after cold stretches. And then what are you doing with Jacksonville?
So Jacksonville, I think, Jacoby Myers is playing well. He's had a couple of nice games in a row. He's ranked in my top 22 or 21 or somewhere in there. And Brian Thomas, I think, is viable. Not somebody I'm looking to start, but talent-wise, I do think that Parker Washington's status does impact both these players a bit. And Parker Washington has a hip injury. I don't have him in the projections right now, but he was DNP on Wednesday and limited practice yesterday. So we're keeping an eye on that. I think if he's back in the projections, both Myers and Thomas drop a little bit from where they are currently. But, the matchup, as you mentioned, is good. Sauce Gardner is out with the calf injury. Yep. So the Colts secondary is not great. Flowers, I think, is certainly viable. His receiving shares in that offense have remained high. They just have been dipping due to the passing game not doing really well. But I think, the Steelers are better against the run than they are against the pass, and Lamar Jackson has some upside as a passer there. So I think Flowers does as well. Metcalf, again, he's DK Metcalf. He's physical specimen. He's the one receiver there that you really trust on a weekly basis. But even so, the Steelers' passing game has been low volume and low functioning the last few weeks. So it is a pretty good matchup, but not a great one. I would say the Baltimore defense has been getting better, so that AFPA number has been dropping as they get healthier.
This is, for what it's worth, Flowers' first decent matchup in like 6 weeks. And the last time he played a decent matchup like this, he had 7 catches on 9 targets for 63 yards. So there is some hope. But him and Metcalf both have been disappointing. So hopefully we can get a bounce back here. On the bad side, flip to the other side of that Jacksonville-Indy game. The Jaguars have been 10th in AFPA, or are currently 10th in AFPA. We have a rolling AFPA system that starts to cut out early weeks as well. And of course, it seems we've gotten a pretty consistent pecking order in Indy between Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, Tyler Warren, and Josh Downs, somewhat in that order. Elsewhere, the Bucs wide receivers get the Saints, who are 7th in AFPA. We touched on that group a little bit. Curious if you have any further thoughts with Evans and McMillan ruled out as to how high exactly Ibuka and Godwin get. Darnell Mooney, for people who are looking for a flex Mooney, he gets the Seahawks, who are 5th. That's not great. And then the Raiders, I don't think you want anyone anyways, but they're facing the Broncos, who are 1st in AFPA. That's terrible. I'm just curious how high the highest ranked Raider receiver is for you, if they're anywhere near starting lineups.
Yeah, for the Colts, 10th doesn't scare me too much in terms of AFPA. Like that's a few spots lower and they're neutral. But then I start to look at the cornerback matchups, and for example, Josh Downs has the toughest matchup in the slot against Jordan Lewis, whereas Greg Newsome and Monteric Brown are either neutral to pretty generous in fantasy point per route covered. So I'm not worried about Pittman or Pierce really. Okay. Tampa, kind of the same story there. If you look at their fantasy points per route covered, the Saints are not particularly stingy. Now, I don't think these numbers are adjusted for schedule like the adjusted fantasy points allowed are. But from a pure fantasy points per route covered standpoint, Ibuka, Mike Evans, he's not playing, but Tez Johnson on the outside have good matchups, and Godwin's matchup in the slot's fine. So nothing really to worry about too much there. I'm not really adjusting projections for them. Darnell Mooney, Seattle's they've been playing pretty well defensively, both in rush defense and pass defense. This is a tough situation for the Falcons to get into. All 3 cornerbacks are also pretty stingy as well. So I would try to avoid Mooney, although he does get a bump in the projections with London likely out, if not already ruled out. And then for the Raiders, I've kind of lost faith in Trey Tucker. He had a good run there. He obviously had a really huge game in which no one started him, 3 touchdown game. But had a touchdown a couple weeks ago, but it really hasn't done much since. Even with the Jacoby Myers trade, he hasn't really produced. It's been just Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty. Really, that's really trustworthy in the passing game there.
Yeah, London is one we did not touch on up top, so good to pull that back out. He has not participated in practice. There's a chance he plays, it sounds like. This was as of yesterday, but I would put that chance quite low right now with the back-to-back DNPs. So keep an eye on their injury report. Obviously, if London's playing, you're feeling good about starting him regardless of matchup because he's been very, very good. And we'll close it out with tight ends. The good side of matchups here, Brenton Strange, who is back from injury and looking quite good, gets the Colts, who are 27th in AFPA. So we touched on the receivers a bit. Curious what you feel about Brenton Strange. And I'd be curious how you feel about him down the stretch as well, because there's a lot of people asking, can I just trust Brenton Strange to be my tight end through the fantasy playoffs if they've been streaming all year? And then this Baltimore tight end duo, Tough to know what to make of them, but the Steelers are 25th in AFPA against the position, so that would be nice if we could get one of them to be trustworthy as the guy between Likely and Andrews. How do you feel about this group?
Well, I think it's tough to project Andrews and Likely, but I think in this matchup they're both startable. I probably trust Mark Andrews a bit more just due to touchdown potential that he's had or shown. As for Strange, yes, I've got him ranked, I think, tight end 5 this week. Tight end 7. Great matchup against the Colts. He's been very involved. I wrote him up for sneaky starts. 5 for 93, 3 for 45, and a touchdown on 9 total targets in the last 2 weeks. In his 6 non-injury games this year, he's averaged 5.3 targets per game, which is not what we want out of our elite tight ends, like that, you're drafting in the 3rd or 4th round. But for a player that we can pick, I picked him up on the waiver wire, and Scott Fishbowl, and got a couple good games out of him. I think you can trust him rest of season, and the offense is doing pretty well, and he's got a pretty good role in it. And certainly in a matchup like this against the Colts, he's very startable.
On the bad side, to close out our matchups, Travis Kelce gets the Texans 3rd in AFPA. Unsurprisingly, they are basically killer everywhere. But you express confidence in Mahomes, so I imagine you may have confidence in Kelce. A few less confident guys. Aronde Gadsden gets the Eagles, who are 7th in AFPA. We touched on him very briefly at the top, but he has not been good after that couple-week stretch where it looked like he was going to be a rest of season star. So curious how far he's fallen for you. And then Colston Loveland gets the Packers, who are 6th. Hasn't necessarily been all that reliable, and this is a tough matchup in the cold. And Dallas Goedert gets the Chargers, who are 10th. Not terrible matchup, but A.J. Brown's picked things back up. It seems like Dallas Goedert's a little less needed. Are you willing to roll him out as a starter in need?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the tight end landscape these days. There's three tight. I mean, Kittle's on bye.
Oof.
Hunter Henry's on bye. Theo Johnson's on bye. Now Theo and Hunter are not locked in our tight end ones, but the Kittle is. There's 3 guys that I'm excited to start this week: McBride, Bowers, and Warren. Otherwise, I'm just like, all right, let's run somebody out there that might get 5 or 6 targets and a touchdown. I certainly think that Kelce falls into that category. I think Gadsden falls into that category. Loveland, I've got a tight end 14, as a more of a high end tight end 2. Like I said, I'm a little worried about the Bears passing game this week against Green Bay, as I think they're going to try to go run heavy. Dallas Goedert has slipped. He's faded since the really, really hot start. I think they came in with the season with a game plan to get him more involved, and this whole A.J. Brown thing blew up in their face, and they realized that they have A.J. Brown and maybe they should throw him the ball. I think Goddard is – I think he's more of a low volume, and not such a bad matchup. I mean, they're 10th in adjusted fantasy points, a lot of position. It's an indoor game in the dome, so I don't think this is a bad start at all, Dallas Goedert, but I'm not confident in his volume at this point in the season.
All righty. That is all the matchups. We don't have much in the way of questions in the chats, though there are several start-sit ones. Just as a reminder to anybody who's asked start-sit questions and are still here, go check out John's rankings. You can find them that way. And I think, John, correct me if I'm heinously wrong here, but that you will also potentially answer these questions in an AMA today.
I do a Friday AMA for subscribers in our Discord, so I do answer all the questions I get there, even start-sit ones. And sometimes I just pull up my rankings and list the names in order. So it's a lot of fun. Noon Pacific in the Discord.
There you go. You can get all the goodies if you are in the 4for4 Discord. There's a lot of other goodies too, so hop in there. But here's a couple. We'll start off with a riveting kicker question, which in fairness matters this time of year. In the playoffs, you need every little point you can get. Better kicker for the fantasy playoffs, this is Jonathan Santiago. Between, and the names or the teams are listed, Miami, Denver, Chiefs, and Baltimore. I think that's Riley Patterson. Am I right on that? And then
it is right now. Jason Sanders is on his way back at some point, but we're waiting on Guffman. Waiting for Guffman here with Jason Sanders.
Yeah. And then Will Lutz, Butker, and Tyler Loop. Who do you like here?
All right. So I go to hotspots and I sort by PO3, so you can see the order of their schedules in terms of total points added up there or averaged. And you're asking for Miami, which they have at Pittsburgh, which is a green matchup. They're Cincy at home. I mean, that Pittsburgh game could be a weather game. We don't know. Week 15. Cincinnati at home, and then Tampa at home. Neutral, and then a pink matchup. So not a pretty good schedule, not too scary. Denver. Where are you, Denver? Third worst schedule with Green Bay at home, neutral. The thin air, though, does help Lutz there get some distance on his field goals. And then he's got Jacksonville, which is a red matchup at home. And then at KC, could also have some weather in those games. KC, Butker, Chargers at home, at Tennessee, both neutral matchups, and then Denver at home, which is a pink matchup. So a so-so schedule for him. And then Baltimore, where we got Tyler Loop. Then I would say mediocre to bad. He's got at Cincy, neutral, at home against New England, which is a red matchup because the New England defense is pretty good. And then at Green Bay, considered neutral, could have some weather games, all three of those. So I might be streaming week to week. I don't know if you're able to add and kind of move in and out of these guys. Nobody is really, I mean, Miami, the schedule is probably the best, clearly the best of the three, but it's not necessarily a great offense. And we don't know if Riley Patterson will be kicking all 3 weeks.
Just for the heck of it, for people who are looking to figure this out down the stretch, assuming you are streaming week to week, which largely, unless you've got a top guy, I think is probably the way to go. Do you care more about like quote unquote matchup or weather, or is it like a 50-50 combo?
Well, I like dome teams on, dome kickers on good offenses. Indoors is the best, but good offenses is the next thing I look at. And then if there's a weather problem, if there's high winds or snow or precipitation, I will usually get out of that kicking matchup and find something else. It's just worth noting that Evan McPherson has the best schedule. Baltimore at home, at Miami, and then Arizona at home. And now he's got Burrow back, so that seems pretty good. Nick Folk has Buffalo, which is not a great matchup at home, but then he's got at Baltimore and at at the Jets. So those are 2 really good matchups as well. And then Jake Bates, which is he's probably not available. And then Green Bay at Denver, at Chicago, and then Baltimore at home. Green Bay's got the 6th best kicking matchup. So Brandon McManus might be an option as well.
I had Evan McPherson's page pulled up on my other screen, waiting to add with excitement and aplomb, and you yanked the rug out, but very accurately. They're at the Bills this week in that snow game that we mentioned, but he's only 51% rostered on Yahoo. There's a non-zero chance that drops if this week does not go well. So if he's available now, I'd maybe stash him. If he's available next week going into that Ravens game, that's I don't know what's going on here, because he's been incredible for fantasy for like 2 months now, even before Burrow got back, and has a great schedule down the stretch. So he'd be one I'd be looking to. I like that point out. This one also from Jonathan Santiago, a bit speculative, which I know is not our favorite thing, but it is a relevant question. The CD concussion, quote, looked pretty bad. I don't know that we can say that at all. Concussions are concussions. But Jonathan asks, do we think it's possible Pickens gets to fantasy playoffs by himself out there if they lose next week? Obviously, he has a 10-day recovery period time. Someone else, Ken in chat, asked a similar CD question. So just looking ahead, and I don't think you're going to bench CD if he's back or anything like that, but do you have any strong feelings about the way that this pans out down the stretch?
Well, I do think there's varying degrees of concussions. I did see a post from an injury follow on Instagram that broke the whole thing down, and he was having some hand and leg movements that were indicative of his brain bouncing around his
Fencing.
skull, and they were actions that are babies have them often, where their legs are sticking out, the arms stick out, and it's involuntary. And when your brain stem gets rattled that much, in adults, the brain above that controls and suppresses that reaction with the arms and the hands. When they see that, they know that it's a certain type of concussion that has impacted the brain stem. So I say all that to say that this might not be. This certainly doesn't look like this will be one where he is back next week. Other than the fact that he does have a couple extra days with the Thursday game to play. But I would assume that he's likely going to sit out next week. And this could be one, and we do see it from time to time with these concussions where they miss multi-weeks, especially if this turned out to be a worse concussion than a typical one where they are not having this sort of physical reaction after the play. If Pickens is there by himself, it probably raises his floor. You're also going to probably see Flournoy emerge as a sneaky play with Lamb potentially out, and Ferguson, going to be ranked in the top 5 or 6 pretty frequently if Lamb is not available.
Tough one. One more question from Jonathan Santiago. Really filling up the chats with good questions here. 1 QB league, I have Mahomes. Should I pick up Jaden Daniels to drive myself crazy every week of the playoffs about who to start? And this is a question I've seen from a lot of people, not between him and Mahomes specifically, but are you picking up Daniels and trusting him with it sounding like he's now back? Where is he, I guess, in your rest of season rankings? Who do you like more between this duo, and how confident are you in playing Daniels?
Well, I just pulled up our hotspots, and this is a great way to look at a committee and see, is this one that's good from a schedule standpoint? And if you look at Kansas City, obviously he's got a bad matchup. Mahomes does this week. He's still ranked in my top 5 or 6 because he's been playing well. They have a lot of weapons. And then just the nature of the QB situation right now. But next week he's got Chargers at home. That's a pink matchup, light red. At Tennessee in week 16, that's a green matchup. And then Denver at home in week 17. And I would be looking to get out of the Denver game for sure. So if you look at Washington week, and you might even want to start him this week potentially against Minnesota. But next week at Giants, that's green. So that matches up well with the Chargers game that Mahomes has. So if Daniels looks normal this week and you have him, next week you could deploy him against the Giants and I would have him ranked ahead of Mahomes just based on the matchups. Week 16, he's got Philly, which is a bad matchup, but you have Mahomes against Tennessee. And then in week 16, you would have him in KC's matchup against Denver. You would have Daniels at home against Dallas. So I would pick him up. And I don't think it would be a situation where you're driving yourself crazy. You follow the matchups. You start Daniels in week 15. You start Mahomes in 16. And then you start Daniels again in 17 if he's still playing and starting for the Commanders.
I write an article elsewhere where I talk about things to know for upcoming weeks, and I mentioned in that article that I would stash Marcus Mariota for that week if you have Mahomes, to play him over Mahomes confidently because of that matchup. So with Jaden Daniels now being back, I would say that's not even close to being a question. Even if that's the only reason you're adding him for that 1 week, that is worth it in my opinion. So I like that call. Maybe last question from Modern Poppy. Yo. I just need someone to tell me it's okay to drop Shakir. This is not technically a question. To drop Shakir for Alec Pierce. Everyone seems to think that's crazy, but I hear Pierce is going to keep blowing up. I could drop BTJ. What would be your take here, John?
Well, I mean, I have Pierce ranked ahead of Shakir rest of season. So
There you go.
I give it a 2 thumbs up. I think it's been that way for a few weeks. Pierce has been playing great. He's been outscoring Shakir. A lot of air yards, a lot of targets. Yeah, I would absolutely do this.
Yeah, Shakir has maybe a slightly higher floor, although I don't even know that that's true anymore because Pierce has been so effective, but the ceilings are vastly different. So I like this call as well. And then this will be the last question. Robert Alvarez, hearing that I have Purdy and Jones at QB, I'm assuming that's Daniel Jones at QB. Should I go grab Daniels, Jaden Daniels, if he's there? I would also be, with this question on top of the other one, I'd just be curious to know where you'd have Daniels rest of season. I don't even know if he's in your official rest of seasons yet, but where do you think he'll fall and who will be close on either side of him?
Well, he's let's see here.
So people know.
Yes, I do have him in there. I had him at 19, but this is prior to us knowing that he's going to start this week. So I'll probably adjust that up. And just discussing his schedule rest of season, it's certainly appealing if he's going to be out there. Now they could shut him down if he gets dinged up again or something happens. They could shut him down. I would put Purdy slightly ahead of Jones, and I probably would cut Jones for Daniels in this scenario because of the fibula injury with Jones. He's just not going to run right now as much, or doesn't have as much mobility. So that sort of limits him. I think I would go through with this and take Daniels over Jones and play your best matchup each week.
Yeah. Purdy after the bye, which is this week. So obviously if you need to play him this week, don't do anything crazy, but Titans, Colts, Bears. So that's pretty nice down the stretch. All righty. That is all for this show, week 14. To anyone who is not getting playoffs, good luck with all these brilliant pieces of advice from John and more that you can get in your AMA if you show up to the Discord. In making the playoffs this week, to anyone who's already in playoffs and has players on bye because they've made their playoffs in week 14, please talk to your commissioner for next year. This is a rough thing. And I get it that some leagues are weird, like the Scott Fish Bowl and such is life, but this is tough. Any closing thoughts, though, before we hop off the pod and into the remainder of a weekend, the last regular season fantasy weekend for most people?
No, just good luck, everybody, this week, and hopefully you get in the secure playoff spot, stay alive, stay on top of your rosters and starting lineups this week, and I'll keep projections updated.
I will say one closing thing, because some people will be eliminated from playoff contention this week. This is not just a selfish reminder to show back up to our podcast so we have listeners. If you are eliminated from playoffs, stay plugged in to fantasy, because a lot of people unplug, and then the last month of the season, a bunch of stuff happens that you don't know about, and you don't know going into next year that they happened, and it's a disadvantage. So if you're eliminated, sad, you can play DFS still. Hop into the pod, keep tabs on things that are happening, and be better set up for next year. All right, we'll sign off there, though. Thanks for listening. Adios. See you in week 15 and the fantasy playoffs.